Edgar Mullins showed up for his usual Sunday coffee run at Millie's Cafe, only to find his regular parking spot blocked off with a cone and a sign, reserved for HOA guest. He slowed the car to a stop, one hand gripping the wheel a little tighter than usual. The cone looked freshly set, straight, unscuffed, and the sign taped to it fluttered in the breeze like a smug little flag. He blinked once, then again, as if maybe it was a mirage brought on by the warm September sun. It wasn't. 7 years. He had parked in that same spot, under the fading maple at the corner of Main and Lilac, for 7 years. Never a complaint, never a ticket, never even a note under the wiper. Until today. He backed up slowly and pulled into the next available space, 3 stalls down, partly shaded by a utility pole. It wasn't the walk that bothered him, it was the principle of it. He climbed out, his left knee protesting, and straightened the collar of his button-down shirt. A breeze stirred the air with just enough warmth to hint summer hadn't fully left Georgia. The sidewalks glowed faintly golden in the late morning light, and the bell above Millie's Cafe door chimed its usual flat chime as Edgar stepped inside. The place smelled the same as always, cinnamon, weak coffee, and old stories. Miss May was already seated by the window, her hands wrapped around a floral mug, half listening to Mr. Darrell retell something about the war and a misbehaving goat. Edgar tipped his head in greeting and walked to the counter. The girl behind it, too young to remember dial-up, smiled and poured his usual. He handed her a 5 before she could ask and said simply, "Tips already counted." He took his seat near the end of the counter, like he did every Sunday, just far enough to hear the windowside gossip but not close enough to be caught in it. But today his ears weren't listening for stories. They were waiting for the click of a heel on concrete. And sure enough, it came. Charlene Dobson entered like she was arriving at a press conference. All pastel tones and pearls, clipboard tucked under her elbow like a badge of office. She didn't order anything. She didn't need to. Her coffee, light with 2 sugars, was already being made, partly out of habit, partly out of survival instinct. She approached Edgar's seat not as a friend, but as a press liaison. "Oh, Mr. Mullins," she said with that chirpy cadence she used at board meetings and bake sales. "Hope you're enjoying this lovely weather." He glanced sideways, not rude, just slow. "Looks like I had to park down the street this morning," he said evenly. Charlene blinked once. "Yes, we had to reserve that spot this week. Our out-of-town guest for the gala needed close access. It's all part of our appreciation initiative." She paused. "You did get the flyer, didn't you?" He nodded, slow and tight. "I did." "Wonderful." She smiled. "It's a shame we only had space for a limited guest list, but I do hope you'll understand. Community leaders from all over the county. Very high profile. I'm just here for coffee." Her smile faltered a beat, then returned. "Of course. And you're a fixture here, Mr. Mullins." He didn't respond. She hesitated, only for a blink, then excused herself toward a booth in the back, where 2 HOA board members sat adjusting napkin holders and cross-checking the guest list. Edgar took his mug to go. Outside, the air was still bright, the sidewalk clean. He crossed the street back toward his car, the cone still smugly occupying his usual space. He considered moving it. Just enough to feel like he'd won something. But instead, he got in the car and drove home. Lucia called that afternoon. Her voice, half laughing, half curious, came through the speaker like it always did when she was working weekends. "You sound grumbly," she said. "Didn't get my usual spot at Millie's," he replied. "That's a federal offense in Brookvale." He smiled, though she couldn't see it. Charlene reserved it for her gala guest. She cleared that with the city. "I doubt it. Didn't see a permit posted." Lucia hummed. "You want me to look it up?" "No need. Just curious." "Well, keep me posted. You know I love a good paper trail." When the call ended, he stood in the kitchen, staring at the colorful flyer on his counter. It was glossy, full of stock images of wine glasses and sun hats. At the bottom, in gold script, it read, "By invitation only." His name wasn't on it. He tapped the corner of the flyer twice, then laid it flat beside the kettle. The kitchen was quiet except for the tick of the wall clock and the distant hum of a lawnmower down the street. He poured himself a glass of iced tea, added 2 lemon slices, and leaned against the counter. Wonder if they even filed for a permit. He carried the tea into the hallway and opened the door to the garage. The motion sensor light flickered on with a buzz. His steps were slow but firm as he crossed to the far cabinet, green metal, slightly rusted, labeled in his handwriting, "Property, 1990s." He gripped the handle, tugged gently. The drawer slid open with a sound like breath after a long silence. Inside, beneath folded survey maps and manila envelopes, lay a thick paper tube with the word of Brookvale, Lot Z/C, scrawled on the outside. He pulled it free, unrolled the brittle blueprint onto the workbench, and smoothed it flat. Top right corner, approved, 1994, public access utility zone. He didn't say anything. Just studied the old ink lines and easement notations. Then, without a word, he turned toward the far corner of the garage, where a tall filing cabinet stood with one drawer already cracked open. He stepped toward it, fingers steady, and reached inside. The map from 1994 wasn't alone. It lay above layers of paperwork, community notes, flyers, newsletters. And as he touched the edge of one folder, the faintest smile crossed his lips. He hadn't needed the sign to know things were shifting. But now he had something more than instinct. He had records. He had time. Lucia drove in from Atlanta with a folder in her lap and a question on her lips. "Uncle Ed, what exactly do they own?" Edgar didn't answer right away. He stood by the side of the workbench in his garage, a blueprint unrolled before him, the afternoon sun slanting through the small window above the tool rack. Dust floated in the light like old secrets. Lucia stepped out of her car and tapped the top of the folder against her palm as she approached. Inside the garage, the air smelled faintly of oil, cardboard, and the faint spice of cedar. She leaned over the workbench and glanced at the blueprint. "Lot C?" she asked, squinting. He nodded slowly. "Used to be a community garden. Back when your aunt still ran the Wednesday kenning circle." Lucia smiled faintly, then reached for a pencil from the side tray and gently tapped one corner of the paper. "You realize this notation says utility access, public easement, right?" Edgar didn't blink. "That's what I suspected." Lucia laid her folder flat and opened it. "I pulled a property boundary map from the county website this morning. Cross-referenced it with the Brookvale Springs master plan. Guess what's not listed under HOA control?" He raised an eyebrow. "Lot C." They had a 5-year usage agreement. Expired in 2019. No record of renewal. Edgar's fingers hovered above the blueprint. "The flyer for the gala doesn't mention a permit number." Lucia tilted her head. "It wouldn't need to if they thought they owned it outright." He straightened slowly, reaching for his glasses. "They don't." She opened her laptop on the cleared side of the bench and navigated to the zoning office's site. "Want to call and ask, or should I?" He gestured. "You speak their language better." While Lucia waited on hold, Edgar stepped inside to the kitchen and put on the kettle. He checked the clock, 3:18 p.m., and reached for the familiar blue tin of English breakfast. Coffee was for mornings and townsfolk. Afternoon required something quieter. By the time he returned with 2 cups, Lucia was already mid-call. "Yes, I'm trying to verify the permit status for Lot C, Brookvale Springs, yes, adjacent to the clubhouse." "Correct." She took the offered cup, mouthed "thank you," and continued listening. "I see, and no pending applications?" "Nothing filed for next week." She looked up at Edgar. "Yes, I'm with a resident, he's reviewing property history. You'll email confirmation?" She smiled. "Wonderful. Thank you, Miss Tyner." She clicked off. "Well?" Edgar asked. Lucia blew across her tea. "Nothing." HOA hasn't submitted any permit requests for events in the last 6 months. He looked back toward the garage. They'll move forward anyway. Probably. But now we know. They sat in silence for a moment, tea cooling in their hands. Outside, a pickup rolled by, radio low with an old Merle Haggard song. The afternoon light deepened just a touch, gold shading toward amber. Mr. Darrell wandered over from across the street, holding a long cardboard tube. "Evening, Ed, saw your garage light on. Brought that old drafting ruler I mentioned. Figured you'd put it to use before me." Lucia greeted him warmly. Edgar thanked him with a firm nod and gestured toward the blueprint. Darrell squinted. "Lot C," he muttered. "Charlene's trying to put up banners again." Lucia answered for them. "Looks like they forgot to ask the city first." Darrell chuckled. She always did prefer forgiveness over permission. When he left, Edgar and Lucia remained at the bench. Lucia was now cross-referencing parcel IDs with the tax assessor's site. "There's a loophole here," she said, voice quieter now. "If this land is still city-managed, and there's no exclusive use claim, we can file our own request." "For what?" Edgar asked. Lucia turned to him with a grin. "For something better than a gala." His eyes narrowed, not suspicious, just measuring. "A block party," she said. "Community style. Food, folding chairs, music under the trees. All legal. All ours." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached into the drawer beneath the bench and pulled out an old envelope marked Utilities, Lot C. Tucked inside was a handwritten note from Marie, his late wife, dated 1998, listing which neighbors had contributed planters and benches to the garden project that once stood there. He stared at her familiar scrawl for a long moment, then folded it neatly and placed it back. Lucia's phone buzzed. She glanced down. Tyner emailed back. "Confirmed, no current permits, no HOA ownership. Lot C is listed as open municipal access." She opened the email and scrolled, smiling as she read aloud. "You may file for a temporary use permit for events open to the public, subject to standard review." She looked at Edgar. "Can we file for a community use event on Lot C this week?" He took a breath, slow and steady. His gaze drifted toward the driveway, where shadows from the maple out front stretched long and soft over the curb. In the HOA office, Charlene rehearsed her speech for the VIP gala. Across town, Lucia printed a city-stamped permit for the Brookvale block party. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered once as Charlene paced behind the long oak conference table, her heels tapping rhythmically against the polished laminate floor. She cleared her throat. "Esteemed residents and honored guests," she began, then stopped, frowned, and motioned to Malcolm, seated quietly near the coffee machine. "Can we test the spotlight again? The angle's still flattening my hair on the left." Malcolm didn't respond right away. His reading glasses perched low on his nose as he reviewed an itemized list of expenditures. He finally looked up. "It's a community clubhouse, Charlene. Not a soundstage." She didn't blink. Optics matter. Meanwhile, across town at City Hall, Lucia stood at the counter, freshly signed permit in hand. The clerk, a thin woman in her 60s with a bob haircut and floral blouse, handed over the duplicate with a warm smile. "Permit number 4421, she said. "You're good to go. Just remember, max amplification decibel is 65, and no open flames without secondary clearance." Lucia nodded. "We're old school. Charcoal and community." She tucked the paperwork into her leather tote, thanked the clerk, and stepped into the warm Georgia light. By late afternoon, she and Edgar stood before the entrance of Lot C. A gentle wind lifted strands of her hair as she peeled off the adhesive backing and smoothed the official permit across the metal gate. In bold black letters, "Brookvale Block Party, September 9th, approved use." Diane walked by, a paper grocery bag in hand. "You're really doing it?" Edgar gave a faint nod. "Just making use of what's still available. I've got an old bin of folding chairs," she said, stopping a few steps past them. Mind if I bring them? Lucia smiled. We'd love that. As Diane moved on, Edgar adjusted the corners of the permit, pressing them firm. Back in the HOA office, Charlene was fixing a bouquet of artificial sunflowers in a glass vase when Malcolm cleared his throat. I passed Lot C on the way here. Charlene glanced at him but kept arranging the flowers. And? There's a city permit taped to the gate. For a block party. Her hand froze mid-adjustment. A what? He slid a folded sheet across the table. Lucia Mullins. Authorized use. It's official. She took the paper, read it once, then again. Impossible. That's our space. It isn't, Malcolm said quietly. Charlene stood still for several long seconds. Then she spun on her heel and reached for her phone. I'll call the city. Have it revoked. There's obviously been a clerical error. Lucia, meanwhile, had returned home to find Edgar brewing tea, loose leaves steeping in the same brown ceramic pot he'd used for decades. Miss May had stopped by earlier, leaving behind a casserole dish wrapped in an old linen towel with embroidered initials. The note read, "Sweet potato, no raisins. For Sunday." The back porch had become a makeshift planning hub. Mr. Darrell brought out a tape measure and suggested where to line up picnic tables. Diane offered to string lights from the fence. Edgar kept mostly quiet, watching the rhythm of the preparations with steady calm. An hour later, Lucia's phone buzzed. Hello? It was Miss Tyner from zoning. Her voice carried a hint of amusement. Just a heads up. Someone from the HOA called 5 minutes ago asking to file an overlapping event on Lot C. We declined, of course. Already reserved. Permit stands. Lucia chuckled. Thanks for letting me know. No problem, Tyner said. Enjoy the party. Lucia ended the call and relayed the news to Edgar. He didn't smile, but his eyes glinted faintly with something close to satisfaction. That evening, Brenda from the Brookvale Bulletin sent Lucia an email. Subject, 2 events, same weekend. Body, hearing there's a VIP gala and a block party planned on the same parcel. Can we set up a quick interview for the community section? Lucia forwarded it to Edgar without comment. He replied 2 words, your call. Elsewhere, inside the increasingly tense HOA office, Charlene clutched a glossy mock-up of the gala brochure. It featured a stock image of champagne glasses clinking beneath string lights. The heading, Brookvale Appreciation Evening, an exclusive affair. She looked down at the freshly printed flyer, then at the permit notice her assistant had just handed her, confirming the city's rejection of her retroactive application. She slapped the brochure onto the table with a sharp crack. We'll see about that. 2 flyers appeared on every doorstep that Friday morning, one embossed in gold with cursive lettering, the other printed plain in blue ink with a simple headline, Everyone's Invited. Maple Lane was awake early that day, with paper rustling and porch doors creaking open. The gold flyers shimmered faintly in the morning sun, slipped neatly into mailboxes and tucked beneath doormats by HOA volunteers dressed in polos bearing the WCF logo. A few doors down, Miss May bent slowly to retrieve her mail, her eyes narrowing behind thick-rimmed glasses as she held both sheets side by side. Gold for the special folks, blue for the rest of us, she murmured. Across the street, Edgar sat on his porch rocker, a mug of hot tea cupped in his hands. His eyes scanned the neighborhood calmly, but when he spotted the flyers being handed out, his fingers tightened slightly around the ceramic. Lucia appeared a moment later, stepping out with her own copy of the blue flyer in hand. Just dropped them this morning, she said, setting a stack on the porch bench. Clean type, friendly tone. No italics. Just the facts. He nodded once, sipping his tea. She handed him one of each flyer. The gold one read, Brookvale VIP Appreciation Gala, an exclusive evening for our most dedicated members. No date listed. No RSVP instructions, just the phrase, attendance by selection. The blue flyer simply said, Brookvale Block Party, Sunday afternoon, lots C, music, food, friends. Everyone's invited. Edgar looked up at her. Marie used to say, hospitality doesn't need a red carpet. Just a clean table and 2 chairs. Lucia smiled. Sounds like we're setting enough tables then. By mid-morning, a quiet current ran through the neighborhood. Neighbors compared flyers in hushed tones at mailboxes, in driveways, over low fences. Mr. Darrell arrived with a yellow notepad, flipping to a page where he'd sketched a rough seating layout. Same pattern I used for our wedding in '78, he told Lucia. It worked then, it'll work now. Brenda from the Brookvale Bulletin stopped by the porch with a notepad and recorder. Just checking, who's in charge of the block party? Lucia gestured to Edgar. He raised his mug slightly. Depends on what needs doing. In the HOA office, Charlene stood behind the long table, her hands resting on her hips. Malcolm sat nearby, flipping through a folder. Ruth and Ted, longtime HOA supporters, hovered awkwardly near the refreshment corner. These block flyers, Charlene said, tapping one with her fingernail. They're amateur. No brand identity. No exclusivity. Ted cleared his throat. They're welcoming. People seem to like them. Charlene shot him a look. I'm just saying, he added quickly, they came across kind. Charlene paced. This community deserves structure. Tradition. Not folding chairs and lemonade. She turned toward the whiteboard. We need to clarify the gala is for contributors. For those who keep this neighborhood what it is. Malcolm, still reviewing numbers, spoke without looking up. That list keeps getting shorter. Outside, the response to the flyers had already taken a visible shape. Foldable chairs appeared on porches, each labeled with masking tape, Ruth M. D. Clark, bring back. Coolers were dusted off, recipes discussed over fences. Miss May offered her sweet potato casserole unprompted, saying, you don't throw a party without starch. Diane, always polite, always neutral, approached Charlene in the HOA parking lot. I was wondering, she asked gently, what's the purpose of the gala this year? Charlene blinked. Purpose? Who's it for? It's for the community. But most of us didn't get an invite. Charlene adjusted the stack of brochures in her arm. It's about highlighting excellence. Diane nodded slowly, then walked away without further comment. Late that afternoon, Edgar found an envelope slipped under his screen door. It was from the mayor's office. Inside, a handwritten note from Mayor Evans himself. Looking forward to stopping by Sunday afternoon, for the community one. Lucia read it aloud, then grinned. He picked a side. Edgar folded the letter and placed it between the pages of an old gardening manual. He picked a table. Back at the HOA office, the air felt tight. The board had gathered again, but no one touched the coffee. Charlene stood at the head of the table, fists on hips, eyes scanning the room. We cannot let this man upstage the association. Charlene opened her inbox to 2 things, RSVPs from her HOA board members, and a forwarded email from the city clerk, to the press. Her office smelled faintly of printer toner and synthetic lavender from a plug-in diffuser she hadn't changed since June. The ceiling light buzzed overhead, flickering every few minutes like it couldn't decide how much of the room to illuminate. She scrolled quickly past the subject lines confirming Ted's attendance, Ruth's diet restrictions, and then paused. FWD, public notice, permit confirmation, Lot C, Brookvale Springs. Sent from Tyner at cityzoning.gov. To Brenda at brookvalebulletin.com. She read it twice. Then a third time. The forwarded message confirmed the block party's official status, listing the permit number, event date, and declaration of approved community use. It was the same document Lucia had attached 2 days ago in a short, respectful reply to Charlene C. Sanders' threat. Charlene's lips pressed into a line. She picked up her phone, dialed the HOA legal counsel, and didn't wait for the receptionist to transfer her. We need to escalate, she said flatly. This event is unvetted, and it poses safety risks. From outside her frosted window, the faint sound of laughter drifted in, distant but clear. She stood up and parted the blind just enough to see across the main road. Lot C was bustling. Neighbors gathered in pairs and small groups, testing string lights, painting hand-lettered signs, staking tiny flags into soft soil. A child ran past holding a balloon. She let the blind fall back into place. Meanwhile, at Millie's cafe, Edgar and Lucia sat at a table near the window. The latest edition of the Brookvale Bulletin lay open between them. On the front page was a wide-angle shot of Lot C, sunlit and lively. The headline read, "Two visions, one lot, where does Brookvale stand?" The subheading below, "One event by invite only. One by and for the people." Lucia folded the paper carefully, then took a sip of her sweet tea. "You've officially been called a philosopher," she said. Edgar raised an eyebrow. "It's in Brenda's caption." She wrote, "Edgar Mullins, known to many as the porch philosopher of Maple Lane, observed the preparations with quiet certainty." He tapped the table once. "Could be worse." The bell above the diner door rang, and Diane stepped in, a canvas tote over her shoulder. She offered a soft hello, slid into the booth next to them, and passed Lucia a folded slip of paper. "It's from the mayor's office," she whispered. "Just confirming what I asked last week. That the property is still municipally zoned and the permit stands." Lucia scanned it quickly. "Thank you." Diane shrugged. "They didn't need my email, but I figured it didn't hurt." Across town, Charlene stood at the center of the HOA boardroom, holding a printed draft of the cease-and-desist letter in one hand and her phone in the other. "We're sending this to the city," she said. "And a copy to every household on Maple Lane." Malcolm leaned back in his chair. "We're using HOA funds for this. It's a protective measure. Against chairs and potato salad." She glared at him. He closed the folder on the table. "I'm not signing it." Charlene stepped forward. "You're the treasurer. I'm also a neighbor. Lucia's undermining the integrity of this board." Malcolm stood. This board lost its integrity the minute it forgot who it was serving. Outside, the preparations for the block party continued. Folding tables lined the edge of Lot C. Miss May and Mr. Darrell placed name cards made of folded index stock on each plate. Someone set up an old boombox playing Patsy Cline. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and charcoal starter. Inside his living room, Edgar folded the newspaper and set it aside. A Glenn Miller tune drifted from the radio, soft and slow. He looked out the front window, where Diane was handing out handmade flyers to a small group of neighbors. Lucia entered the room, holding her phone. "She's going to try again." Edgar didn't ask who. He just waited. "Charlene's lawyer emailed the city," Lucia said, "demanding they revoke the permit on the grounds of unauthorized usage." But Tyner replied with a full PDF of the code book. She paused, then added, "Brenda's running a follow-up tomorrow. Title, The Gala Nobody Asked For." He didn't smile, but he set his teacup down slowly. Lucia sat beside him and looked out the window too. "They're going to try something Sunday. We'd better be ready." By 10 a.m. Sunday morning, Lot C smelled like charcoal, peach cobbler, and community spirit. Across the street, the HOA clubhouse was still silent. Folding chairs lined the shaded side of the lot, their backs labeled in tidy marker, Darrell, Ruth M., Diane G. A long table stretched across the center, covered in mismatched tablecloths, floral, checkered, one with tiny faded ducks. Crockpots steamed quietly beside baskets of cornbread and trays of deviled eggs. Laughter rose from the far end of the field where children chased each other between balloons tethered to tomato stakes. Edgar sat under a pop-up canopy that Mr. Darrell had insisted on calling Command Center. He sipped hot tea from his mug, a small chip near the handle worn smooth by decades of use. Across the lot, Miss May handed out paper fans decorated with painted sunflowers. Brenda's photographer crouched near the pie table, capturing wide smiles and wide-brimmed hats. From the porch of the HOA clubhouse, Charlene adjusted the lapel of her pastel blazer. Her welcome table had 3 small plates of wrapped mints, a stack of glossy brochures, and a crystal pitcher of lemon water, untouched. 2 guests stood nearby, both board members. One scrolled his phone. The other checked his watch. At the edge of the lot, Lucia was setting down a cooler of iced drinks when she heard a small cheer. Turning, she saw Mayor Evans approaching with slow, confident steps, a pair of aviator sunglasses perched on his nose. "Morning, Mayor," she said, brushing her hands on her jeans. He took in the scene with a broad smile. "Smells better over here." Behind them, someone whooped. A song from the 70s played on a Bluetooth speaker. Diane greeted the mayor with a handshake and offered him a plate already stacked with ribs and potato salad. Across the street, Charlene watched from the clubhouse window. Her prepared remarks, printed on thick cream cardstock, lay on the podium untouched. A car pulled up, idled, then moved on. Inside Lot C, the buzz grew warmer, brighter. Brenda stood beside her camera operator, murmuring notes. Her phone displayed the live stream's title, "This is what community looks like." Hearts and thumbs up flooded the screen. Lucia caught the corner of it and smiled. Mr. Darrow leaned on a cane and pointed toward the rows of guests. "We didn't send a single formal invitation," he said, "but look at M." Lucia patted his arm. "They invited themselves." At the far edge, a group of 3 guests hesitated between the clubhouse and Lot C. One muttered something about RSVPs. Another shaded her eyes and asked, "Is that sweet potato casserole?" Within minutes, they'd crossed the road. Charlene's heels clicked once on the clubhouse floor as she turned sharply, eyes fixed on the movement. She picked up her speech and folder, marched down the front steps, and crossed toward the block party. A hush fell, not sudden or fearful, but expectant. Edgar didn't rise. He merely looked over the rim of his mug. Charlene stopped just past the permit sign, her voice clipped. "This is unauthorized. It's a violation of public gathering." Lucia stepped forward, silent at first, then raised one hand and pointed at the laminated permit still affixed beside the gate. The ink was a little faded from sun, but the number was clear, permit number 4421, approved use. "We're right where the city says we can be." Charlene froze, lips slightly parted. The moment stretched, filled with the low murmur of neighbors watching, the pop of plastic cups, the whir of a child's pinwheel in the breeze. Then a girl, no more than 8, approached from between the tables. She held out a sweating cup of iced tea with both hands, the lemon slice floating gently at the top. "Want to stay a while, Miss Charlene?" Monday morning, a folded envelope sat crooked in Edgar's mailbox, marked in bold, "Notice of infraction, unauthorized public gathering." He picked it up without a sound, fingers steady despite the message it carried. The envelope was crisp, official in its formatting, and bore the WCA insignia in the corner, embossed and slightly smudged. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he brought it inside, set it gently on the dining table, and turned toward the kettle. By the time Lucia arrived 15 minutes later, the envelope sat beside an open folder containing the printed permit, receipts for portable restrooms, a copy of the city's event regulations, and 15 color photographs. "Someone's feeling brave," Lucia muttered, holding up the infraction letter after reading its contents. "They're accusing you of damaging community property and violating usage rights." Edgar poured 2 cups of tea, one with a thin slice of lemon. "No signatures on the damage report. Just bold type." "Typical," she said, sliding into the seat opposite him. He handed her the mug. "We respond." Lucia smiled. "With detail." She spent the next hour attaching evidence, a time-stamped video showing the cleanup crew gathering trash into labeled bags, a city-issued checklist of event site responsibilities, all marked complete, and the signed permit that had been publicly posted 3 days in advance. At the end of the email, she wrote, "Per Municipal Code Section 4.2-109, all event obligations were met. No damage reported. Please find attached permit and supporting documentation. Regards. Lucia G. Mullins, on behalf of Edgar Mullins." Across town, Charlene stood in the HOA boardroom, pacing with clipped steps. The notice had been sent out early, before Brenda's second article hit the newsstand, but the timing hadn't helped. This morning's headline read, "Block Party, Lawful, Loved, and Loud in Spirit." Malcolm sat at the end of the table, flipping through a printout of the WCA checking account. Anita, the secretary, tapped her pen nervously against the armrest. "I gave you clear authorization," Charlene said sharply, waving a manila folder toward Anita. "You were supposed to file the supplemental motion." Anita looked up slowly. "You told me to move funds for PR without noting the line item. Said it was urgent." Charlene's eyes narrowed. "It was to protect our image." Malcolm cleared his throat. "You moved money without a board vote?" Charlene shot him a glance. "We've done it before." He set the printout down. "No, Charlene. You have." She turned toward him. "This party was an embarrassment to the board. It made us look fractured." "We are fractured," Malcolm replied calmly. "Because you spent HOA money on a personal vendetta." Silence fell over the room. Only the hum of the old ceiling fan filled the space, spinning too slowly to make a difference. "I'm bringing this to a vote," Malcolm said, standing. "Effective immediately, I motion to suspend Charlene Dobson from the role of HOA president pending an investigation into financial mismanagement." Anita hesitated, then raised her hand. "I second." The motion passed with 3 raised hands. Charlene remained frozen in place, clutching the edge of the table as if it might steady something deeper than her balance. That afternoon, Miss Tyner from zoning called Lucia directly. "Hi there," she said cheerfully. "Just wanted to let you know, we received the HOA's complaint. Reviewed it. You're in the clear. Lot C is spotless. Frankly, I wish every group left spaces that clean." Lucia thanked her, then turned the speakerphone on so Edgar could hear. Tyner continued, "Tell Mr. Mullins he's officially the least troublesome permit holder we've had all season." He raised his teacup in silent salute. Around 4 o'clock, a moving truck appeared at the corner of Maple and Lilac. The same white SUV that had parked in front of the clubhouse now sat in the driveway of Charlene's 2-story home. Neighbors glanced through curtains but said nothing. A few walked dogs a little slower past her mailbox. Edgar stood on his porch, steam rising from his cup. The breeze carried the distant rattle of bungee cords and the scrape of furniture being shifted. He didn't wave. Didn't blink. Just watched as the SUV pulled forward, a U-Haul trailing behind. He took a sip of tea and settled into the rocker, the seat creaking gently beneath him. Justice hadn't shouted. It had simply arrived, quietly, on a Monday. A week later, a new wooden sign appeared on the edge of Lot C, reserved for Brookvale Community, in honor of E. Mullins. The lettering was hand-carved, stained a deep walnut, and mounted between 2 cedar posts freshly dug into the soft ground. Below the words, someone had etched a small acorn, the same image Marie once painted on the corner of their mailbox all those years ago. From his porch, Edgar saw it before the sun had fully crested the rooftops. The morning was quiet, the kind of stillness only early autumn could bring. Across the street, the grass of Lot C had grown thick and green. Someone, likely Diane, had added low flower beds near the fence, filled with mums and dwarf sunflowers. A white bench sat beneath the elm now, facing west. The scent of baked cinnamon drifted faintly through the air. From next door, Miss May's kitchen window was open, the clatter of cooling racks and spatulas carried gently on the breeze. Lucia arrived just past 8, carrying a cardboard box of plastic cutlery and a bottle of lemonade tea. "They asked if we had an extension cord for the crockpots," she said by way of greeting. Edgar stood, joints slower than they used to be but dependable. He motioned toward the garage. "There's one in the tin labeled, Christmas Lights, 2005. She grinned. "Knew it." By mid-morning, Lot C was busy again, but this time, there were no speeches, no brochures, no permissions sought or challenged. Just food, neighbors, folding chairs, and a long row of tables that had been hastily sanded and painted pale blue by Mr. Darrell and Ruth over the weekend. Diane, now officially listed as part of the HOA's new advisory committee, wore gardening gloves as she helped hammer in another short fence post. She'd been asked to represent continuity, a title she laughed at, but didn't decline. Brenda drifted through the gathering with a small voice recorder, this time not as a reporter chasing drama, but as a neighbor curious about memories. She stopped Edgar near the cooler and asked, "One word for what this is?" He considered. "Restoration." She smiled and tapped her recorder off. "The porch where things changed," she said. "That's the title." Lucia had been quietly nominated as the new liaison for younger residents, a role she accepted with a shrug and a promise to just keep things from getting ridiculous. Someone handed out paper plates. Miss May's sweet potato casserole made a second appearance, and Diane had baked a sour cream pound cake that disappeared in less than 20 minutes. The mayor didn't give a speech this time. He just walked around with a Dixie cup full of fruit salad, laughing with someone's uncle and handing out napkins. When the sun hit the edge of noon, Brenda asked Edgar if he might say a word or two. He shook his head at first, but after Lucia nudged his elbow, he stood. No microphone, no platform, just Edgar at one end of the tables, hands in his cardigan pockets, glasses catching the afternoon light. "We all deserve a place to stand," he said. "And we found it, together." That was enough. They clapped, not thunderously, but evenly, warmly. Later that day, after the potluck had thinned and folding chairs had been returned to their labeled bins, Edgar sat once again on his porch, a glass of iced tea sweating on the table beside him. The sign across the street caught the amber wash of late sunlight, standing tall above the lawn. A knock came at the screen door. He looked up. A girl, no more than 10, stood with a notebook hugged to her chest. "Mr. Mullins," she said, bright-eyed and breathless, "can I interview you for my civics report?" 1 week after the noise faded and the chairs were folded, the town didn't feel louder, but it felt stronger. The lot that once stood for division now held benches, laughter, and the kind of peace that only comes when neighbors take back what was always theirs. Rules are meant to serve people, not silence them, and when power forgets that, even a quiet man on a porch can become the spark that changes everything. Like a steady flag waving over freshly cut grass, justice doesn't always arrive with sirens, it arrives when a community says, "Enough." Perhaps it's never too late to open your door, pull up a chair, and stand for something that matters.